something unexpected is happening around The Chosen, and it's not just another viral headline or fan reaction. Quietly, and almost unbelievably, a show many people once ignored is now changing minds, challenging lifelong beliefs, and pulling in viewers who never thought faith had anything to offer them. And the most shocking part? Some of those viewers used to call themselves atheists. Section 1. With The Chosen. Moving closer to its next chapter, conversations around the show have taken a much deeper turn. What started as a faith-based series for a niche audience has somehow crossed boundaries no one really saw coming. More and more stories are surfacing about people who had no religious background at all, people who openly rejected the idea of God, now finding themselves emotionally invested in a story they never planned to watch. And this isn't coming from marketing campaigns or promotional interviews. It's coming straight from the people involved in the show itself, who seem just as surprised by the impact as the audience is. One of the most striking revelations came when Jonathan Rumi opened up about messages he's received from viewers over the years. After keeping a relatively low profile for a long time, hearing him speak so openly felt almost intimate, like he was finally letting people see the weight he carries behind the role. And when he talked about scrolling through his Instagram messages and stumbling upon notes from people who describe themselves as lifelong atheists, it completely reframed the conversation around The Chosen. These weren't casual viewers. These were people who claimed they had never had any interest in God, faith, or religion in any form. And yet, somehow, they pressed play. What's fascinating is how often the story begins the same way. Someone recommends the show almost offhandedly. No pressure, no expectations, just a simple suggestion. And then that first episode starts, and before they even realize what's happening, they're drawn in. Jonathan himself described it as the show grabbing hold of you, and that description feels surprisingly accurate. There's something about the way the story unfolds that doesn't feel like preaching or persuading. Instead, it feels human, relatable, almost disarming. And for viewers who spent years building walls against faith-based content, that approach seems to make all the difference. According to the messages Jonathan shared, watching The Chosen didn't immediately change everything overnight. It started small. Curiosity replaced resistance. One episode turned into another. Characters began to feel real instead of symbolic. And eventually, without planning to, some viewers found themselves asking questions they had avoided for most of their lives. Questions about meaning, about purpose, about whether they might have been wrong about faith altogether. For some, that curiosity led them to pick up a Bible for the first time. For others, it meant stepping into a church, not because they felt obligated, but because they genuinely wanted to understand more. What makes these stories so powerful is how unexpected they are. Even fans of the show, people who deeply love The Chosen, often admit they never imagined it would resonate this strongly with non-religious audiences. It challenges the assumption that faith-based storytelling only works within a specific bubble. Instead, The Chosen seems to be operating on a different level, one where emotional truth matters more than labels, and where storytelling opens doors that debates and arguments never could. Jonathan himself called these journeys remarkable, and it's hard to disagree. Changing a belief system isn't easy. For someone who has identified as an atheist for most of their life, choosing to even explore faith requires vulnerability. And yet, these stories suggest that The Chosen creates a space where that vulnerability feels safe. It doesn't demand belief. It invites reflection. And somehow, that invitation is proving to be far more powerful than anyone expected. At its core, this phenomenon raises a bigger question about why The Chosen is having this effect at all. Is it the writing, the performances, the focus on relationships rather than sermons? Or is it something deeper, something viewers feel but can't fully explain? Whatever the reason, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. This show is no longer just entertainment. It's becoming a catalyst for conversations people never thought they'd be having. And for some, it's quietly reshaping the way they see faith, life, and even themselves. What makes this entire situation even more compelling is that the impact of The Chosen doesn't seem accidental or forced. It feels deeply connected to how Jonathan Rumi himself approaches the role of Jesus. Over the years, he has been asked countless times how he manages to bring such depth, warmth, and authenticity to a character who has been portrayed in so many different ways before. And every time, his answer circles back to the same core truth: his personal faith. Jonathan has never claimed that acting alone is what carries the performance. Instead, he openly admits that what he brings to the role is his own relationship with Christ, his own love for Jesus, and his attempt to reflect that love through the character. And for many viewers, especially those who come in with skepticism, that sincerity is impossible to ignore. In one interview, when he was asked whether he could have played Jesus without being spiritual or religious, his response was strikingly honest. He explained that the role isn't something he simply puts on and takes off. For him, it's rooted in who he already is and what he believes. He talked about how embodying Jesus isn't just about memorizing lines or hitting emotional beats. It's about trying to understand and recreate a love for humanity that feels almost impossible by human standards. And according to Jonathan, that process hasn't just changed the audience, it has changed him as well. He admitted that playing Jesus has made him want to love people more, to be more patient, more compassionate, and more present in his own life. That kind of transformation behind the scenes adds another layer to why the show resonates so deeply. Viewers often sense when something is being performed versus when it's being lived. And even those who don't believe in God seem to recognize that what Jonathan brings to the screen comes from a real place. It doesn't feel manufactured, it feels personal. And that authenticity may be one of the biggest reasons The Chosen breaks through walls that logic and arguments never could. Instead of telling people what to believe, it shows them what belief can look like when it's grounded in love and humanity. Jonathan's openness doesn't stop at his faith either. He has shared moments from his life that feel almost surreal, like his meeting with the Pope. Hearing him describe that encounter sounded less like a celebrity meeting, a global religious figure, and more like a scene from a film. He spoke about how kind, warm, and genuinely charming the Pope was, exactly as people imagine him to be. But what made the story even more memorable was the humor tucked inside it. When the Pope casually admitted that his brother watches The Chosen all the time, but that he himself hadn't seen it yet, the moment became unexpectedly human. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was light, honest, and surprisingly relatable. That sense of humility and humor reflects the same tone The Chosen carries throughout its storytelling. Even in moments involving major religious figures or sacred themes, the show never forgets the humanity of its characters. And that balance seems to matter a lot, especially to viewers who may be uncomfortable with overly formal or distant portrayals of faith. When Jonathan joked that he couldn't help the Pope with confession because that was his job, it showed a comfort level that comes from sincerity rather than ego. Moments like that remind audiences that faith, at its core, is lived by real people, not perfect icons. All of this feeds back into why atheists and non-religious viewers might find themselves unexpectedly drawn in. They're not being asked to accept doctrine or tradition up front. They're being invited into stories about people, relationships, doubts, fears, and hope. And through Jonathan's performance, Jesus is presented not as an untouchable figure, but as someone deeply connected to human suffering and human love. That portrayal doesn't demand belief, but it does invite empathy. And for many, the emotional weight behind The Chosen becomes even more intense when the conversation shifts toward what lies ahead. As the series moves closer to its most painful and defining chapter, the crucifixion, the tone surrounding the show noticeably changes. Jonathan Rumi has been open about how filming these moments has affected him on a level far deeper than anything he experienced in previous seasons. And listening to him describe that process makes it clear that Season 6 is not just another continuation of the story. It feels like a turning point, both for the show and for everyone involved in bringing it to life. Jonathan explained that as an actor, his goal is always to find the truth within a character. To play someone authentically, he believes you have to fully step into their reality, their emotions, and their experience. But when it comes to portraying Jesus during the crucifixion, that process becomes overwhelmingly intense. He spoke about trying to understand not only the physical pain, but the mental and emotional suffering that came with it. The betrayal, the isolation, the knowledge of what was coming, and the choice to endure it anyway. Even hearing him talk about it feels heavy, and it's easy to understand why he described this part of the journey as something that continues to stay with him long after filming wrapped. What stands out most is how Jonathan described asking God to allow him to experience even a small sense of what that suffering felt like. And according to him, that request was answered. He admitted that he's still processing the experience, still unpacking the emotional and psychological impact of stepping into that moment so deeply. That kind of honesty adds a level of gravity to Season 6 that goes beyond storytelling. It suggests that what viewers are about to see isn't just acted pain, but something shaped by genuine emotional surrender. And for an audience already emotionally invested, that knowledge raises the anticipation to an entirely new level. This intensity isn't limited to the actors alone. Dallas Jenkins, the creator of The Chosen, has also spoken openly about how challenging this season has been for him personally and professionally. He described Season 6 as one of the most difficult undertakings of his life, not because of logistics or production alone, but because of the emotional weight of telling this part of the story. The crucifixion is not an easy narrative to approach, especially when the show has spent years building such a deeply human connection to Jesus and those around him. Bringing that story to the screen requires not only technical precision, but emotional honesty, and that kind of honesty comes at a cost. Jenkins also confirmed that Season 6 is now fully funded, including what he called a supersized finale that will focus on the crucifixion. Hearing that confirmation feels significant, because it means the creative team won't have to hold back. They can tell the story the way they believe it needs to be told, without compromise. And knowing how careful The Chosen has been with its storytelling so far, that freedom is likely to result in some of the most powerful moments the series has ever delivered. What's remarkable is how all of this ties back to the show's growing influence. As the narrative moves toward its darkest and most painful chapter, the conversations around The Chosen are becoming deeper, more serious, and more reflective. This isn't just about entertainment anymore. It's about confronting suffering, sacrifice, and love at their most extreme. And for viewers who may have started the show out of curiosity or skepticism, this stage of the story has the potential to challenge them in ways they never expected. Season 6 feels less like something to be watched casually and more like something to be experienced. And as the weight of the crucifixion approaches, both the creators and the audience seem to understand that what's coming will leave a lasting mark, not just on the story, but on the people who choose to follow it through to the end. The emotional weight behind The Chosen becomes even more intense when the conversation shifts toward what lies ahead. As the series moves closer to its most painful and defining chapter, the crucifixion, the tone surrounding the show noticeably changes. Jonathan Rumi has been open about how filming these moments has affected him on a level far deeper than anything he experienced in previous seasons. And listening to him describe that process makes it clear that Season 6 is not just another continuation of the story. It feels like a turning point, both for the show and for everyone involved in bringing it to life. Jonathan explained that as an actor, his goal is always to find the truth within a character. To play someone authentically, he believes you have to fully step into their reality, their emotions, and their experience. But when it comes to